September 1945, San Francisco Bay, 3:47 in the afternoon. Reiko Tanaka gripped the rusted railing of the transport ship, her knuckles white against the peeling paint. 24 years old, Imperial Army nurse, prisoner of war. She had spent the last 3 weeks at sea preparing herself for what came next. The stories had been clear, repeated so many times they had become gospel. American soldiers were demons. They tortured prisoners. They showed no mercy. Death would be a kindness compared to what awaited captured Japanese women. She had made her peace with it, had written final letters to her mother and sister that would never be mailed, had said her prayers to ancestors she would soon join, had even tied her hair back the way her grandmother taught her so she would face death with dignity. Then she saw them. The American soldiers stood in formation on the dock below, waiting as the ship groaned and shuddered toward its berth. The afternoon sun hung low over the bay, painting everything in shades of gold and orange. The light hit the soldiers perfectly, illuminating them like actors on a stage. They were tall, impossibly tall, with broad shoulders and straight backs and uniforms that fit like they had been tailored by artists. Their faces were clean-shaven, their hair neatly combed, their boots polished to a mirror shine. One of them, young with sandy blonde hair, stood with his hands clasped behind his back. Another, taller and darker, was smoking a cigarette, the smoke curling lazily in the golden light. They looked healthy, strong, almost elegant in the way they carried themselves. They looked nothing like the propaganda posters. They looked like movie stars. The words escaped before Reiko could stop them. A whisper in Japanese, barely audible above the wind and the ship's engines. Kanojo tachi wa eiga no suta no yo ni mieru. Beside her, Sachiko Yamamoto gasped and grabbed her arm. 22 years old, Tokyo-born, always too optimistic for her own good. "Don't say that," Sachiko hissed. "Someone might hear." But it was too late. Around them, 45 other Japanese women had seen what Reiko saw. Their faces showed the same confusion, the same shock, the same forbidden thought. These were not the demons they had been promised. These were not the crude, violent beasts without culture or honor. These men looked like they had stepped out of the American films that had been banned in Japan since 1941. Films Reiko had seen as a teenager in the years before the war consumed everything. At that exact moment on the dock below, Private James Cooper felt the photograph in his breast pocket like a hot coal against his skin. 22 years old, Texas farm boy, 6 feet tall with sun-bleached hair and calloused hands that had never fully adjusted to holding a rifle instead of a plow. He stood in formation with the other guards watching the Japanese transport ship lumber into dock and tried to keep his face neutral. Professional, the way Staff Sergeant Williams had ordered. But his hand kept drifting to his pocket, to the photograph, to Tommy, his brother, 3 years older, the one who was supposed to come home, the one who enlisted the day after Pearl Harbor, while Jimmy was still too young, still 17, and trapped on the ranch while history happened without him. Tommy had written letters from Guadalcanal, from Tarawa, from a dozen islands Jimmy couldn't pronounce. Letters about the heat and the jungle and the waiting, about how war made you see things differently, about how the enemy up close looked just like scared kids. The last letter had arrived February 10th, 1945. 9 days before Tommy died on the black sand beaches of Iwo Jima. 9 days before a Japanese bullet or mortar or grenade. Jimmy never learned which had ended his brother's life 6,000 miles from the Texas Panhandle. The telegram came February 19th. His father read it once, folded it carefully, walked to the barn, and didn't come out for 2 days. Now, 6 months later, Jimmy stood on a dock in San Francisco, watching Japanese prisoners disembark, and every cell in his body screamed that this was wrong. These people had killed Tommy, and he was supposed to guard them, protect them, treat them with dignity, under the Geneva Convention. Cooper. Staff Sergeant Williams's voice cut through his thoughts like a blade. You're assigned to Camp Stoneman Guard Detail. These prisoners are your responsibility. You understand? Jimmy's jaw clenched. Yes, Sergeant. I asked if you understand private. Yes, Sergeant. I understand. But he didn't. Not really. How was he supposed to protect the people who had taken his brother from him? The gangway clanged against the dock. The sound made several of the Japanese women flinch. An American officer walked up the ramp, grey temples, stern face, but not unkind. He spoke in clear, measured English. You will disembark in single file. Follow the marked path to the processing area. You will not be harmed. A Japanese-American translator repeated his words. A woman about 25 Nisei, probably caught between two worlds in a way Jimmy couldn't begin to understand. Her name was Emily Watanabe. Her accent was strange, neither fully Japanese nor fully American. The women descended slowly, one by one. Reiko's legs trembled, though whether from fear or from 3 weeks at sea she couldn't tell. As her feet touched American soil for the first time, she felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. She was the enemy now, a prisoner in the land she had been taught to hate. But as she walked past the formation of soldiers, something unexpected happened. The young one with the sandy blonde hair gave her a brief nod. Not threatening, not mocking, just acknowledging her existence as a human being. It was the smallest gesture, less than a second, but it shook Reiko more than any cruelty could have. Jimmy watched the women file past, tried not to look at their faces, tried to see them as the enemy, as numbers, as anything but individuals. But he kept failing. They looked tired, scared, young. Most of them were in their 20s. A few looked barely 18. They wore simple cotton uniforms, wrinkled and stained from the ocean crossing. One of them, the one who had been first down the gangway, caught his eye. Something about the way she carried herself, straight back despite obvious exhaustion, dignity despite circumstances. She bowed slightly as she passed. Jimmy's hand moved before his brain could stop it. A brief nod. Recognition. Then he forced his eyes forward back to attention before Sergeant Williams could see. But the damage was done. For just a moment, Jimmy had seen her not as the enemy, but as a person, and he hated himself for it. The women were loaded onto military buses with wire mesh over the windows. As the convoy rolled through San Francisco, Reiko pressed her face to the glass, unable to look away. The city was alive. Cars everywhere gleaming in the afternoon sun. Buildings rose tall and intact, their windows reflecting the sky. People walked the sidewalks in clean clothes, carrying shopping bags, laughing, living. Children played in parks. Life, untouched by war. Reiko thought of Tokyo, of the last time she had seen her neighborhood before deployment to Saipan. Entire blocks reduced to ash and twisted metal, children picking through rubble for scraps, the sky perpetually grey with smoke. This city looked like it belonged to a different planet. "Is this real?" Sachiko whispered beside her. "Or is this propaganda too?" No one could answer, because none of them knew anymore what was real and what was lie. The bus stopped at a military facility outside the city. A sign read, Camp Stoneman, in bold black letters. Guard towers stood at intervals along the fence line, but they seemed almost decorative, as if no one really expected trouble. Inside, processing began. American clerks sat at desks with typewriters. They asked questions through translators. Name, age, hometown, unit assignment. The questions were routine, bureaucratic. There was no interrogation, no threats. Just forms being filled out in triplicate. Then came the medical examination. Reiko's heart hammered against her ribs as she was led to a separate wing. She had heard stories of what happened to captured women, stories that made her stomach turn and her hands shake. But the nurse who approached her was middle-aged, with kind eyes and greying hair pulled back in a professional bun. She wore a clean white uniform and held a clipboard. Her name tag read, Lieutenant S. Morrison. "Good afternoon," she said through the translator. "I'm going to check your general health. Have you been sick recently?" Reiko shook her head, unable to speak. Lieutenant Morrison took her temperature, timed her pulse, looked in her ears and throat with a small light. She frowned when she examined Reiko's hands, which were rough and scarred from 2 years of field nursing, burns from sterilizing equipment, cuts from broken glass and metal, calluses from carrying stretchers and holding down screaming patients during surgery without anesthesia. "You've worked hard," Morrison said gently. Reiko blinked, surprised by the observation, by the acknowledgement that her suffering had been real. Morrison applied ointment to a cut on Reiko's palm that had refused to heal properly. "This should help," she said, handing Reiko a small tube. "Apply it twice a day." Reiko stared at the tube in her hand. Medicine, given freely to the enemy. It made no sense. After medical checks, the women were directed to a large communal shower room. They walked slowly, bunched together for safety, eyes darting nervously. Shower rooms could mean many things. The war had taught them that. But when they entered, they found only white tile shower heads along the walls and stacks of clean white towels on wooden benches. A female American sergeant stood by the door. "You will shower and change into clean uniforms," the translator announced. "Your personal belongings will be returned to you after inspection. Take your time." Take your time. The words were so strange that several women looked at each other in confusion. Reiko undressed slowly, folding her salt-stained uniform carefully. Other women did the same, their movements cautious, waiting for the trap to spring. When Reiko turned the shower handle, hot water poured out immediately. Not lukewarm, not cold, hot. For the first time in 14 months, she felt truly hot water on her skin. It ran through her hair, washing away salt and sweat and the accumulated grime of captivity. Soap was provided in bars, real soap that lathered and smelled faintly of lavender. She scrubbed her skin until it turned pink, feeling layers of dirt and despair wash away down the drain. Around her, women were crying, soft, quiet sobs that mixed with the sound of running water. They had prepared themselves for degradation, for violation. Instead, they had been given dignity. Sachiko stood under the shower next to her, her small frame shaking. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why are they doing this?" Reiko had no answer, but something fundamental was shifting inside her. Some foundation she had built her entire worldview upon was beginning to crack. When they emerged clean and wrapped in towels, they found fresh uniforms waiting. Not prison rags. Simple, practical work clothes in grey and blue. There were even undergarments, clean and new. As Reiko dressed, she caught sight of herself in a small mirror mounted on the wall. She barely recognized the woman staring back. Clean. Hair still damp but no longer matted. Skin scrubbed pink. She looked like herself. Like Reiko Tanaka, daughter of a railway engineer graduate of Tokyo Imperial Army Medical Academy. Not a number. Not a prisoner, a person. The mess hall was enormous. Long tables stretched from one end to the other, but it was the smell that stopped the women in their tracks. Food, real food, cooking. The line moved slowly as women received trays. American cooks spooned portions onto each plate. Mashed potatoes, butter melting into steaming white peaks. Green beans. Sliced turkey with rich brown gravy, a bread roll soft and warm, and in a small bowl, fruit cocktail with bright red cherries. Reiko stared at her tray as if it might vanish. In the final months before capture, her meals had consisted of rice mixed with barley, sometimes with a few vegetables, often with weevils. Toward the end, just rice. Sometimes, not even that. This tray held more food than she had seen in weeks. She sat at one of the long tables. Around her, women sat frozen, unsure what to do. One girl, no more than 19, touched the bread roll with one finger as if testing whether it was real. "We should eat," Reiko said quietly. They went through the trouble of preparing it. She picked up her fork and cut into the turkey. The meat was tender, seasoned with herbs she couldn't name. She placed a small piece in her mouth and nearly gasped. It tasted like something from a dream. Her eyes watered, but she forced herself to chew slowly, to maintain her dignity. Around her, other women began to eat. Some quickly, desperately, others slowly, reverently. At the end of the table, Mieko Sato was crying openly, tears streaming down her face as she ate her mashed potatoes. An American soldier, young with dark hair and kind eyes, noticed. He approached with concern on his face. "Is she okay?" Emily spoke to Mieko in Japanese. Mieko wiped her eyes and nodded, speaking rapidly through her tears. "She says the food is very good," Emily reported. "She hasn't eaten like this in a very long time." The soldier's expression softened. He nodded slowly, then walked away. No mockery, no gloating, just acknowledgement of suffering. That night in the barracks where they were housed, the women lay in actual beds with mattresses and blankets. The room was heated. Outside they could hear the sounds of the American military base, trucks moving, men talking, distant laughter, normal sounds, human sounds. Sachiko leaned over from the next bed. "Reiko," she whispered. "What happens to us now?" "I don't know." "Do you think they'll send us home eventually?" Reiko paused. "Japan is destroyed. What will we go home to?" The question hung in the darkness unanswered. Across the room, another whisper rose in the night. "Did you see how tall they were, the soldiers? Like giants." "And so clean," another voice added. "Their uniforms were perfect. Like actors in those American films." The whispers multiplied. Women finally daring to speak the forbidden thoughts they had been holding since the dock. The Americans were not what they had been told. Then Tomoko Nakamura sat up in her bed. 34 years old, senior nurse, Kyoto-born, hardcore imperial loyalist. Her voice cut through the whispers like a blade. "Listen to yourselves, giggling like schoolgirls about the enemy. Have you forgotten what they did to our country? Have you forgotten your duty to the emperor?" Silence fell, heavy, uncomfortable, guilty. Reiko lay awake, torn between two impossibilities. Tomoko was right. They shouldn't be seduced by comfort. But how could she deny what her eyes had seen? The hot water had been real. The soap had been real. The food had been real. If they had lied about the Americans being demons, what else had they lied about? Across the base in the men's barracks, Jimmy Cooper lay in his bunk, staring at the photograph pinned above his head. Tommy in uniform, smiling young alive. Danny Martinez spoke from across the room. "You okay, Coop?" "Yeah." "No, you're not. I see how you look at them." "My brother." "I know. My uncle died at Bataan. Death march. Starved and beaten and shot. I know." Danny paused. "But Tommy wouldn't want you eating yourself alive with hate. You know that." Jimmy did know. The last letter had made it clear. Written 9 days before death, Tommy's final words to his little brother. "Don't let hate eat you up, Jimmy. It's not worth it." but knowing and accepting were different things. Tomorrow was breakfast shift. He would be serving them, standing behind the counter with scrambled eggs and strips of bacon, feeding the people whose country had killed his brother. He pulled out Tommy's letter one more time, read the final line by the dim light filtering through the window. "Don't let hate eat you up, little brother." Jimmy folded the letter carefully and placed it back in his footlocker. Tomorrow would come, whether he was ready or not, and somehow he would have to find a way to follow his brother's last command, even if it killed him. The 6 o'clock bell rang clear and gentle through Camp Stoneman. Reiko opened her eyes to find herself still in the bed with the mattress and the blanket. For a moment, she thought she had dreamed it all. But no, this was real. In the kitchen, Jimmy Cooper reported for breakfast duty at 5:30. Sergeant Miller was already there, a 40-year-old veteran from Georgia with tired eyes and steady hands. "Morning, Cooper," Miller said. "You're on the serving line today." "Yes, Sergeant." Miller glanced at him, something knowing in his expression. "You gonna have a problem with that?" "No, Sergeant. Because these women get the same portions we get. Geneva Convention, no exceptions. You understand?" Jimmy's jaw tightened. "Yes, Sergeant." The kitchen filled with smells that made his stomach turn. Scrambled eggs, toast, and bacon. Strips of bacon sizzling on the griddle, filling the air with the rich, smoky aroma of pork fat and salt. Jimmy stared at the strips as Miller transferred them to serving trays. His family had rationed meat throughout the war. Tommy had written from Tarawa about going 3 weeks without protein, about what he would give for just one piece of bacon. And now Japanese prisoners were getting bacon for breakfast. "Problem, Cooper?" Miller asked. "No, Sergeant." But inside something was burning. At 6:30, the women filed into the mess hall. The serving line moved slowly. Jimmy stood behind the counter with a large serving spoon, scooping scrambled eggs onto plates. He kept his eyes down. Woman after woman. Scoop. Next. Scoop. Next. Then Reiko approached. Their eyes met, just for a second. She bowed slightly. "Thank you," she said in careful, heavily accented English. The words hit Jimmy like a physical blow. She was thanking him for eggs, for bacon, while his brother lay in a military cemetery 6,000 miles away. His hand tightened on the serving spoon. Every muscle wanted to refuse her, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain in his chest. But Sergeant Miller was watching, and orders were orders, and Tommy's letter said not to let hate eat him up. He scooped eggs onto her plate, added a strip of bacon, moved to the next woman without a word. Reiko took her tray and walked to a table, her heart racing. The young American soldier's face had been a mask of barely controlled rage, but he hadn't acted on it. He had given her food anyway. That restraint was somehow more frightening than violence would have been. Jimmy served 30 more women. Then Tomoko Nakamura approached. She was older than the others, stern-faced and straight-backed. She didn't bow, didn't say thank you, just held out her tray with an expectation of service. Something in Jimmy snapped. He scooped eggs onto her plate, then picked up a strip of bacon with the tongs, held it over her plate, and let it drop, deliberately. It fell past the plate and hit the floor with a wet slap. Tomoko's eyes flashed. She understood immediately, and Sergeant Miller saw it. "Cooper, my office, now!" The walk to Miller's office felt like a march to execution. Miller closed the door behind them, looked at Jimmy with those tired eyes. "What the hell was that? Accident, Sergeant." "Bullshit. I know deliberate when I see it." Miller paused. "Your brother died at Iwo, right?" "Yes, Sergeant." Miller leaned back. "Mine died at Normandy, June 6, 1944. First wave. Never made it off the beach. 23 years old. Had a wife and a baby girl he never met." Jimmy looked up surprised. "So I know what you're feeling. Miller continued. I know you want to hurt them. Want some kind of revenge, even if it's just dropping bacon on the floor like a goddamn child. The words stung, but they were true. But you know what? That's not who we are. That's not what your brother died for. Miller's voice softened. War's over, Cooper. Now these women are prisoners of war, and we treat prisoners with dignity, not because they deserve it, but because we do. Silence filled the small office. You want to honor your brother's sacrifice? Miller asked. Then be better than the enemy. Show them what American values really mean. Show them that we follow rules even when it's hard. That's how we win the peace, Cooper. Not by dropping bacon on the floor, but by being better than they ever were. Jimmy's throat felt tight. Yes, Sergeant. Now get back to work. And Cooper, it gets easier. Not today. Maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. Jimmy returned to the serving line, his face burning with shame. But Miller was wrong about one thing. It wasn't going to get easier. It was going to get harder. 3 weeks passed. The rhythm of camp life established itself. The women were distributed across various tasks: kitchen duty, laundry, administrative work, and for those with medical training, the base hospital. Reiko reported to the hospital each morning, where Lieutenant Sarah Morrison taught her the American way of doing things. The supplies were abundant. Bandages used once and thrown away. Medicine that actually worked. Equipment that gleamed under fluorescent lights. Morrison treated her with professional courtesy. She showed Reiko where things were stored, corrected her mistakes gently. Where did you train? Morrison asked one afternoon while they restocked bandages. Tokyo, Army Nursing Academy. How long? 3 years. Then 2 years in field hospitals. Morrison nodded thoughtfully. That's solid training. You're good at this. The compliment caught Reiko off guard. Thank you. I mean it. Morrison paused. This war was terrible for everyone. Reiko looked up sharply, but Morrison's expression was sincere, not mocking, just tired. It was an acknowledgement of shared humanity, and it left Reiko momentarily speechless. Late October brought the mail. Letters from Japan arrived in canvas bags. Reiko's hands shook as she received her envelope. Harumi's handwriting. She read it alone on her bunk. Tokyo destroyed. Neighborhood gone. Mother and Harumi living in a shelter made from scraps. Rice once a day if lucky. Father's factory bombed. No work. Everyone hungry. Mrs. Taniguchi dead. Please come home. Reiko read it 3 times, then carefully folded the letter and placed it in the small wooden box under her bed. That evening in the mess hall, she couldn't eat. The turkey and mashed potatoes and fresh bread sat untouched while her sister starved in a shelter made of rubble. Around her, other women were having the same struggle. Plates full of food, eyes full of tears. How can we eat when they starve? Mieko whispered. No one had an answer. The abundance that had seemed like mercy now felt like torture. That night, the tension in the barracks reached a breaking point. This is exactly what they want, Tomoko said, standing beside her bunk. To make us weak, to make us forget who we are. They destroyed our country, and now they feed us chocolate so we'll forgive them. But we invaded other countries first. Sachiko said, her voice small but determined. We started this war. The barracks went silent. Tomoko turned on her. How dare you? And we lost. Sachiko continued, standing now, her voice growing stronger. We lost because old men sent us to die while they stayed safe. But we didn't die because the Americans didn't kill us. They fed us instead. Our own government left us to die on those islands. The Americans saved us. They are the enemy. Then why aren't they acting like it? The question hung in the air like smoke, heavy, impossible to ignore. Tomoko's face went white with rage. She turned her back and climbed into her bunk. But the question remained. The women were fracturing, some adapting quickly, others holding firm to their training, and Reiko found herself caught in the middle, unable to choose. On the morning of day 12, everything changed. Reiko was working in the hospital when the alarm bells rang. Shouts echoed through the corridors. "Medic! Medic!" A training accident. An American soldier on a stretcher, his uniform soaked with blood. Private First Class Robert Hayes, 19 years old, face white with shock and pain. Deep laceration on his right forearm. Arterial bleed. Blood spurting with each heartbeat. Lieutenant Morrison moved instantly. "Reiko, pressure here now!" Reiko's training took over. She grabbed gauze and pressed down hard on the wound. Hayes screamed and thrashed. "Get her off me! Get that Jap off me!" The words were knives, but Reiko held on, bore down harder, used her body weight to keep the pressure steady while Hayes fought against her. "Hayes, shut up! She's helping you!" Morrison's voice cut through the chaos. "Reiko, hold him!" Then the door burst open. Jimmy Cooper had been walking past when he heard the alarm. He ran without thinking, burst through the door, and saw Reiko covered in blood holding down an American soldier who was screaming and fighting. His mind made the only calculation it could. "She's killing him." His hand went to his sidearm. "Get away from him!" "Cooper, stand down!" Morrison's voice was a whip crack. "She's saving him! Get over here and hold his legs!" The words didn't make sense at first, but then he saw Reiko's face. Focused, professional, concentrated in the way doctors looked when they were fighting death. He moved, grabbed Hayes's legs, held him still. Morrison handed clamps to Reiko. "On my count. 3, 2, 1, clamp." Reiko's hands moved with practiced precision. She clamped the artery. The bleeding slowed, stopped. Hayes went limp, passing out from pain and shock. Silence. Just breathing. Just the sound of blood dripping onto linoleum. "Good work, Reiko," Morrison said quietly. "You saved his life." Reiko looked down at her hands. They were shaking now, covered in blood to the elbows. Hayes regained consciousness a few minutes later. His eyes found Reiko. "What happened?" "You had an arterial bleed," Morrison explained. "This woman stopped it. She saved your life." Hayes stared at Reiko. Japanese. Enemy. But also the person who had just kept him from bleeding out. "Thank you," he whispered. Reiko's voice was quiet. "You are welcome." Hayes closed his eyes. Tears leaked from the corners. Jimmy stood frozen by the door, his world tilting on its axis. This woman whose people had killed his brother had just saved an American life without hesitation, while he had reached for his gun. After Hayes was stabilized, Morrison pulled Reiko aside. "Where did you learn that technique?" "Imperial Army Medical Academy. Then 2 years field hospitals, Saipan, Okinawa." Morrison's expression shifted. Understanding. Respect. "You've seen hell, haven't you?" "Yes." "And you still chose to help him, even after he called you?" Morrison trailed off. "He was scared," Reiko said simply. "Scared people say things they don't mean." Morrison looked at her for a long moment. "You're a good nurse, Reiko. Don't ever forget that." Jimmy overheard from the doorway. A good nurse. Not a good prisoner. Not a good enemy. A good nurse. As if her profession mattered more than her nationality. That night, Reiko sat in the barracks and wrote in her notebook by moonlight. Her hands still smelled like copper. "Today, I saved an American soldier's life. He called me a name meant to hurt, But I held on, because that is what nurses do. We do not choose patients based on nationality. In that moment, I was not Japanese. He was not American, just human, helping human. If they lied about Americans being demons, what else did they lie about? And if everything was a lie, then what am I? She stopped writing. Her hand trembled. These were thoughts that could get her killed, but she couldn't deny their truth. Across the base, Jimmy sat in his bunk with paper and pen. He started writing a letter to Tommy. It didn't matter that Tommy was dead. He needed to say these things. Dear Tommy, I don't know why I'm writing this. You're gone, but I need to tell someone. Today, a Japanese nurse saved an American soldier's life. Private Hayes. He was bleeding out and she stopped it. And I almost shot her. I almost killed her because I thought she was hurting him. You were right in your last letter, about hatred destroying people from the inside. I see that now. I almost let it destroy me. These Japanese women aren't the enemy you fought. They're just nurses and clerks who got caught up in something bigger than them, just like you did, just like I did. I still hate what happened to you, but maybe the people who should pay aren't here. They're the generals who started this war, the politicians, the old men who sent young men to die, not these women trying to survive. I miss you, big brother. Your little brother Jimmy. He folded the letter carefully. Wouldn't mail it. Couldn't mail it. But he had needed to write it. The next morning at breakfast, Jimmy stood behind the serving line again. Reiko approached. Their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them. Recognition. Respect. Jimmy scooped a generous portion of eggs onto her plate, added an extra strip of bacon without being asked. You saved Hayes's life, he said quietly. Thank you. Reiko's eyes widened. He had spoken directly to her. The meaning was clear. She bowed. You are welcome. She took her tray and moved on. It was a small moment, seconds, but everything had shifted. The clear lines between enemy and human had blurred beyond recognition, and neither of them would ever see the world the same way again. November arrived with cold mornings. 3 weeks after the incident with Hayes, the camp organized a movie night. A screen was set up in the recreation hall, and an invitation extended to all prisoners. Reiko sat in the middle row. The lights dimmed. The projector whirred to life. And suddenly the screen exploded with color. Technicolor. Brilliant, impossible color. The film was a Hollywood musical. Men in perfectly tailored tuxedos danced across elaborate sets. Women in flowing gowns sang with voices that seemed too beautiful to be human. The music swelled from hidden speakers. The sets were massive, expensive detail down to the smallest prop. This was entertainment. This was what Americans did for fun while fighting a war on 2 fronts. Reiko watched in stunned silence as the leading man appeared on screen. Tall, impossibly handsome with perfect teeth. He wore a military uniform that fit him like a second skin. He moved with confidence that bordered on arrogance. In the darkness beside her, Sachiko whispered, "Just like the soldiers here." And she was right. The Americans Reiko saw every day looked like they had stepped out of this film. They were the living embodiment of American abundance, and Japan had tried to fight this. The realization hit Reiko like a physical blow. How had they ever thought they could win? They had been fighting not just a military, not just an economy, but an entire culture of abundance. A culture so wealthy it could afford to make movies like this while building ships and planes and tanks. A culture that could feed its prisoners bacon and still have enough for everyone else. Japan had been starving since 1943, eating bark and grass, and America had been making musicals. When the lights came up, Reiko saw that she wasn't the only one crying. Women all around her had tears streaming down their faces, not tears of joy, tears of understanding. "We never had a chance, did we?" Mieko said quietly. No one answered, because the answer was obvious and unbearable. At the back of the hall, Jimmy Cooper watched the Japanese women's reactions. He had seen this film before, had thought nothing of it. But watching these women watch it, seeing their faces in the flickering light, he suddenly saw it through their eyes. They had come from bombed cities and starvation and propaganda about American savagery. And now they were watching this explosion of color and wealth and confidence. No wonder they looked shattered. Danny Martinez leaned over. "Think they've ever seen anything like this?" "No," Jimmy said quietly. "I don't think they have." He found himself watching Reiko's face. Even in the dim light he could see the tears, the way her hands gripped the armrests, the slight trembling of her shoulders. She understood now. They all did. They had never understood what they were fighting against, just like Tommy had never really understood what he was fighting for, until it was too late. 2 days later, another round of mail arrived from Japan. Reiko received a second letter from Harumi. Father was dead. December 3rd, pneumonia. Too weak to fight it. Mother was sick, coughing badly, no medicine available. Harumi had found work at an Allied occupation office. The Americans were helping rebuild, she wrote. They were not cruel, but everything was gone. The house, the neighborhood, the life they had known. "When you come home," Harumi wrote, "it will not be to the Tokyo you remember." Reiko folded the letter carefully. Didn't cry. She was beyond tears now. Father dead, mother dying, everything destroyed. And she was sitting in a heated barracks with a full stomach and clean clothes. That night she wrote in her journal with a clarity that felt like fever. "I am no longer who I was when I arrived. That woman believed in the empire, believed in honor through death, believed in an enemy without humanity. But I have seen the truth. The enemy is human, more human perhaps than we allowed ourselves to be. They won not because they were more brutal, but because they could afford to be less brutal, because they had so much that mercy cost them nothing. I must carry this truth back to Japan, to my family, to whoever will listen." The war was built on lies, and those lies killed millions, including my father. I will not lie anymore. She closed the notebook and held it against her chest, feeling the weight of transformation. The same week, Jimmy received a letter from his mother. His father was not doing well. Tommy's death had broken something in him. He sat in Tommy's room for hours, not speaking, barely eating. "Your father asked me to tell you something," his mother wrote. "Don't let hate poison you. Don't become what you're fighting against." Tommy wouldn't want that. Jimmy read the letter 3 times. His father was being destroyed by grief, and Jimmy had been carrying hatred like armor, thinking it would protect him. But it wasn't protecting him. It was killing him, just like it was killing his father. That evening, Jimmy sought out Emily Watanabe and asked her to arrange a meeting. "With who?" Emily asked, surprised. "One of the prisoners, Reiko Tanaka, the nurse." "Why, I need to ask her something." The next afternoon, Emily arranged it. A conference room, a table, 3 chairs. Emily sat between them, ready to translate. Reiko entered nervously. Jimmy stood a gesture of respect that surprised her. They sat. Silence filled the space between them. Finally, Jimmy spoke. "I wanted to thank you for saving Hayes' life." Emily translated. Reiko shook her head. "I was just doing my job. You didn't have to. He said things. Bad things. He was scared. Scared people say things they don't mean." Jimmy nodded slowly. "My brother died at Iwo Jima. February. I've been angry. At you. At all of you. It wasn't fair, but I was. Reiko's expression softened. I am sorry for your loss. But you're not the one who killed him, are you? No. Then who did I lose him to? Reiko thought carefully before answering. To old men who start wars, and young men who fight them. To the lie that dying for emperors and flags is the same as dying for something true. Jimmy felt something loosen in his chest. Yeah, that's what I'm starting to think too. Silence again. But this time it was different. Comfortable. Understanding passing between them without words. When you go home, Jimmy asked, what will you tell people about this place? The truth. That you treated us with dignity. That mercy is not weakness. That Americans followed their rules even when it would have been easier not to. Reiko paused. Will they believe me? I don't know. Will they want to? Some will, some won't. But I have to try. Jimmy extended his hand across the table, a gesture that violated protocol. Good luck, Reiko. She looked at his hand for a long moment, then took it. Her grip was firm, professional, the handshake of equals. Good luck, Jimmy. They held the handshake for 3 seconds, then released. As Reiko left the room, she felt something shift inside her. A door closing on who she had been, a different door opening on who she might become. But that evening, Tomoko was waiting in the barracks. I saw you, Tomoko said, her voice tight with anger, with the American guard, shaking hands, like friends. We're not enemies anymore, Tomoko. Speak for yourself. I will never forgive what they did. Reiko's voice rose despite her intention to stay calm. What they did? What about what we did? What our government did to our own people? Sending us to die for nothing. Letting our families starve while generals lived in comfort. You're a traitor. No, I'm someone who's seen the truth, and I won't lie about it anymore. Tomoko's face went white. She turned and walked to her bunk without another word. But the damage was done. Women who adapted and women who refused. Women who would tell the truth and women who would cling to the old lies. Reiko knew which side she was on now. There was no going back. Winter deepened. Then, in early April, the announcement came. Repatriation. Return to Japan, scheduled for May. The words should have brought joy. But instead, they brought fear, anxiety, guilt, and something that felt dangerously like reluctance. That night, Sachiko cried in her bunk. Reiko leaned over. What's wrong? I don't want to go back, Sachiko whispered. Is that terrible? No, Reiko said firmly. I understand. How can I go back to hunger after this? How can I live in rubble when I've seen their houses? But Reiko understood. How could any of them return to less when they had seen more? The final weeks passed too quickly and too slowly. Women packed their few belongings, said quiet goodbyes to routines that had become familiar. Jimmy requested one final patrol shift before the departure. He found Reiko walking the perimeter during the evening exercise period. Reiko. She turned, smiled slightly. Jimmy, hello. You leave tomorrow, he said. Yes. I wanted to say, I'm glad I met you. I'm glad you were here. That sounds strange, I know, but it's true. Reiko's eyes filled with tears. I understand. I am glad too. You helped me see that not all Americans are what we were told, that mercy is possible, that people can be better than their governments. I hope things are okay for you, back home. Thank you. I hope your father gets better. I hope you find peace. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Jimmy extended his hand one final time. "Take care of yourself, Reiko Tanaka." She took his hand. "Take care of yourself, James Cooper." They shook, held it, released. Then Reiko turned and walked back toward the barracks, not looking back. The next morning, the women boarded buses in the pre-dawn darkness, drove to the port, boarded the transport ship. As the ship pulled away from the dock, Reiko stood at the railing and watched Camp Stoneman shrink in the distance. She could see figures on the shore. One of them, tall with sun-bleached hair, stood apart from the others, just watching, bearing witness. Reiko raised her hand. A small gesture. Jimmy raised his in return. Then the ship rounded a bend and the camp disappeared from view. Beside her, Sachiko was crying openly. "I feel like we're leaving home," she whispered. "How can the enemy's camp feel like home?" Reiko didn't answer. Because it was true and impossible and true anyway. The journey across the Pacific took 2 weeks. When the ship finally approached Japan, Reiko stood on deck watching the coastline take shape through the morning mist. Even from a distance, the devastation was visible. Cities that should have shown lights and tall buildings showed only low, dark spaces, rubble, ash. They landed in Yokohama, were processed by Japanese officials who looked thin and exhausted. The officials stared at the prisoners with expressions Reiko couldn't quite read. These women looked healthy, well-fed. Reiko made her way to Tokyo on foot and by hitched rides. The journey that had once taken 2 hours took all day. Roads were destroyed, bridges were down, entire neighborhoods were simply gone. When she finally found her family's location, she almost walked past it. A shelter made of corrugated metal sheets and scraps of wood. No windows, no door, just a cloth hanging in the entrance. "Harumi!" she called. A figure emerged, thin, so thin that Reiko almost didn't recognize her own sister. Harumi's face was gaunt, her eyes too large in her skull. "Reiko!" Harumi's voice cracked. Then she was running, and they were embracing, crying, holding each other. Their mother emerged from the shelter, older, frailer, but alive. She cried when she saw Reiko. That night the 3 of them sat in the cold shelter eating watery rice from chipped bowls, and Mother finally asked the question. "What was it like, being a prisoner?" Reiko hesitated, remembered Tomoko's warning. "Say nothing about the comfort. It will shame our people." But looking at her mother's worn face, at Harumi's desperate eyes, she made a decision. The decision to tell the truth, whatever the cost. "They treated us well," she began slowly. "They gave us beds, hot water for bathing, clean clothes." Mother blinked. "Well, yes, they gave us food, real food, 3 meals a day, meat, vegetables, bread, as much as we could eat." Harumi stared. "While we starved, yes." Reiko met her sister's eyes without flinching. "While you starved, I ate. While you lived in rubble, I slept in heated barracks. While you suffered, I was comfortable, and I am so sorry for that." Silence. The only sound was wind whistling through gaps in the metal walls. "Why?" Mother asked finally. "Why did they do this?" "Because they believed in rules about treating prisoners. Something called the Geneva Convention. They followed rules even when it would have been easier not to." Reiko paused. "And because they could afford to. Their country was never bombed. They had so much that treating prisoners well cost them almost nothing." "But we were the enemy," Harumi said. "Yes, but they treated us like humans anyway." Reiko's voice strengthened. "And that taught me something. Real strength isn't about being cruel. It's about being able to show mercy even when you don't have to, even when your enemy doesn't deserve it." Mother nodded slowly. Your father would have been proud of you, of who you've become." Those words broke something in Reiko. She cried then finally for everything lost, for her father who had died while she ate bacon, for her country that had lied to her, for the 7 months of transformation that had been both gift and curse, but also for everything learned, for the knowledge that mercy was possible, that enemies could be human, that the world was more complicated and more beautiful than propaganda had ever allowed. Across the Pacific, Jimmy Cooper stood in the train station in Amarillo, Texas, waiting for his father to arrive. June 1946. 3 months since his discharge. A truck pulled up, his father behind the wheel, older, thinner, the grief carved into his face like canyons. They embraced on the platform, didn't speak, didn't need to. At the ranch, Mother cooked a large meal, but Father barely ate, just pushed food around his plate. That evening, Jimmy found his father in the barn, the same place he had disappeared to after the telegram. "Dad." His father looked up, eyes red-rimmed, exhausted. "I wanted to tell you something about my last assignment." And Jimmy told him. About Camp Stoneman, about the Japanese prisoners, about his hatred, about Reiko saving Hayes, about the slow, painful process of learning that the enemy was human, about choosing mercy when everything in him screamed for revenge. Father listened without speaking. When Jimmy finished, silence filled the barn. Then Father spoke for the first time in weeks. "Tommy would be proud of you." Jimmy's throat tightened. "Really? Really?" Father stood, placed a hand on Jimmy's shoulder. The weight of it was solid, real present. "You learned what took me 30 years to learn. Choosing mercy over vengeance, even when revenge feels righteous. That's what separates civilization from savagery. That's what your brother died defending." He squeezed Jimmy's shoulder. "Welcome home, son." And for the first time since February 1945, Father seemed to be actually there, present, alive. They walked back to the house together as the sun set over the Texas plains. And Jimmy felt something release in his chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but acceptance. The war was over, Tommy was gone, and Jimmy was still here, still alive, still capable of choosing mercy over hatred. That was enough. That had to be enough. 6 years later. 1952. Reiko stood in front of a classroom of teenage girls at a school in Tokyo. 31 years old now, married to Takeshi, 3 children, a life rebuilt from ruins. "Tanaka-sensei," one of the girls asked, "did you serve in the war?" Reiko nodded. "I was a nurse. Imperial Army. I was captured. Taken to America as a prisoner." Gasps around the room. "What did they do to you?" another girl asked, voice hushed with the expectation of horror stories. Reiko smiled slightly. "They gave me soap." Confused looks. She elaborated. "They gave me hot water, clean clothes, good food. They treated me with respect even though I was the enemy." "But our teachers said Americans were monsters." "They did," Reiko agreed. "And they were wrong. Not because Americans were perfect. They weren't. But because they were human. Just like us. Just like your teachers. Just like everyone." She walked to the window, looked out at rebuilt Tokyo. Skyscrapers rising. Streets full of cars, life returning. "I want you to remember something. War happens when we forget that enemies are human. Peace happens when we remember it." That evening at home, Reiko received a letter. American postage. She opened it carefully. "Dear Reiko, I hope this letter finds you well. It has been 7 years since Camp Stoneman. I often wonder how you are doing. I am still nursing. Got married last year. We are expecting our first child. I wanted you to know I never forgot what you taught me, that even in war we can choose kindness, that enemies are just people on the other side of bad decisions. Thank you for being brave enough to be human with me. Your friend Sarah Morrison, now Sarah Chen. Reiko held the letter to her chest, crying and smiling at the same time. She would write back tonight, would tell Sarah about her children, about her teaching, about her work, to ensure the next generation understood what the previous one had learned too late. That the soldiers who had shown her mercy when cruelty would have been easier represented not just American power, but American principles. That kindness, even to enemies, was a strength her own nation had never understood. In Amarillo, Texas, that same year, Jimmy Cooper sat on the porch of his ranch house, watching his 2 children play in the yard. 29 years old now, married to Linda, a school teacher. Father still alive, healthier now, able to talk about Tommy without disappearing into the barn. Linda brought him a glass of lemonade, sat beside him. "What are you thinking about?" "People I met during the war, wondering how they turned out." "Do you ever regret it, not going overseas?" Jimmy thought about Tommy, about the photograph he still kept in his desk drawer, about Reiko and the bacon, and the choice to show mercy when hatred would have been easier. "No," he said. "I think I served exactly how I needed to. Not with a gun, but with something harder. With the choice to be better than my worst impulses." Linda kissed his cheek. "Tommy would be proud." "Yeah," Jimmy said, watching his children chase each other through the grass. "I think he would be." And in that moment, Jimmy Cooper felt something he hadn't felt since before the telegram. Peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. He had honored Tommy not through hatred, but through mercy. Not through revenge, but through restraint. That was the real victory. Not defeating the enemy on the battlefield, but refusing to become what you were fighting against. That was what America meant. That was what the soldiers on the dock represented. Not perfection, not moral superiority, but the choice made daily to be better, to show mercy even when it hurt, to treat enemies as humans even when everything screamed for revenge. It was a hard lesson, the hardest Jimmy had ever learned. But it was true, and truth, however painful, was always worth the cost. Both Reiko and Jimmy, 7,000 miles apart, living lives that would never intersect again, had learned the same lesson. The war had tried to make them monsters, but they had chosen through small daily decisions to remain human. And that made all the difference.